soft, measured pace throughout. Close your eyes for a moment, and imagine a path through a forest. The first time you walk this path, you have to push through branches, step carefully over roots, notice every turn. But walk it again tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that, something remarkable happens. The path becomes clearer. Your feet find their way almost by themselves. This is the first whisper of a profound truth. Your mind is always learning, even when you don't realize it's paying attention. In the 1960s, a psychologist named Robert Zajonc discovered something that would change how we understand human preference forever. He showed people nonsense words and random shapes, meaningless squiggles that represented nothing at all. But he showed them these shapes repeatedly. And here's what happened: people began to like them more. Not because the shapes became beautiful, not because they gained meaning, but simply because they had seen them before. He called this the mere exposure effect, and it revealed that repetition itself creates affection. Your unconscious mind is constantly counting encounters, tallying experiences, and somewhere deep in the machinery of your brain, familiarity becomes preference. Think about the songs you love. Often, they weren't the songs you loved at first listen. The melody felt strange, the rhythm unfamiliar. But after the third play, the fifth, the 10th, something shifted. The song became yours. This is your unconscious mind building neural pathways, like water carving channels through stone, one patient pass at a time. Now, consider something even more subtle. Researchers have found that people tend to marry partners whose names begin with the same letter as their own, far more often than chance would predict. Someone named Sarah is statistically more likely to fall in love with a Sam or a Stephen. Someone named Michael gravitates toward Melissa or Michelle. Why? Because we've heard our own names spoken thousands upon thousands of times since birth, and that initial sound, that first letter, carries an unconscious warmth. It's been repeated so often it feels like home. Your unconscious mind doesn't just process information, it collects tiny pieces of comfort and familiarity, building preferences you may never consciously recognize. There's a man who lived in the 1950s named Clive Waring, and his story reveals something extraordinary about the hidden machinery of learning. After a severe brain infection, Clive lost the ability to form new conscious memories. If you left the room and returned 5 minutes later, he would greet you as if seeing you for the first time, convinced you'd been apart for years. And yet, when his wife taught him a simple melody on the piano, something miraculous happened. Though he couldn't remember learning it, couldn't remember the lessons, couldn't remember practicing, his fingers found the keys. The music flowed. His unconscious mind had learned, even though his conscious mind had no memory of the learning. Repetition had carved the melody into parts of his brain that existed beneath awareness, beneath memory, beneath the self he recognized as Clive. This reveals something profound. You are always learning, always being shaped, always being changed by repetition, whether you notice it or not. Your unconscious mind is a student that never sleeps, never takes a break, never stops paying attention to patterns. Consider the way you sign your name. Do it now, if you can. Sign your name in the air with your finger, or imagine doing it. Notice how automatic it feels, how little thought it requires. You've signed your name hundreds, perhaps thousands of times, and now it happens almost by itself. But here's something remarkable: if you were asked to sign your name with your non-dominant hand, or with your foot, or even with a pen held between your teeth, studies show you would produce a signature that still looks remarkably like your usual one. The loops and curves, the relative proportions, they remain consistent. This isn't because your hand learned to sign your name. It's because your brain learned a motor pattern, an abstract blueprint that exists independent of the muscles performing it. Through repetition, your unconscious mind extracted the essence of your signature and stored it as pure pattern, pure form. And so we begin to understand, repetition doesn't just strengthen memories, it transforms conscious effort into unconscious mastery. What starts as deliberate thought becomes automatic feeling. What begins as careful attention becomes effortless grace. There's a study from the 1990s that followed people learning to type on a keyboard. At first, every letter required thought. Where is the K? Where is the M? Which finger moves where? But after weeks of practice, something remarkable happened in brain scans. The areas of the brain associated with conscious visual processing and deliberate motor planning began to quiet down. Different regions, deeper, older parts of the brain, took over the task. The typing had migrated from conscious effort into the realm of the automatic, the unconscious, the effortless. This is your brain's most elegant gift. Through repetition, it can take any burden and, slowly, tenderly, lift it from your conscious awareness, freeing you to think about other things, to dream about other possibilities. As you lie here now, your heart is beating without your guidance. Your lungs are breathing without your instruction. And somewhere in the depths of your unconscious mind, countless patterns are being noticed, countless repetitions are being counted, countless small changes are being made to who you will become tomorrow. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning. Before you've even opened your eyes fully, your hand is already reaching for your phone, or perhaps you're turning to the same side of the bed you always do. You shuffle to the kitchen, and without thinking, you reach for the coffee mug you used yesterday, and the day before that, even though the cabinet holds a dozen others. Researchers have found that about 40% of the actions you perform each day aren't actually decisions at all, they're habits, repeated behaviors running on autopilot. Your unconscious mind is like a dutiful assistant, quietly managing nearly half your life while your conscious awareness focuses elsewhere. In the 1920s, a behaviorist named John Watson performed an experiment that would become both famous and infamous. He worked with a young boy named Albert, who initially showed no fear of white rats. But Watson began pairing the appearance of the rat with a loud, frightening noise. After just a few repetitions, only 7 pairings, little Albert developed a fear not just of rats, but of anything white and furry, rabbits, dogs, even a Santa Claus mask. The unconscious mind had learned to associate whiteness and fur with danger through repetition, and this learning happened faster than anyone expected. Though the ethics of this experiment trouble us now, it revealed something crucial. Your unconscious mind is constantly forming connections, linking this with that, creating invisible threads between experiences that occur together in time. Think about driving a car, if you know how to drive. Do you remember learning? The overwhelming sensation of tracking the mirrors, the pedals, the steering wheel, the other cars, the signs, the speed, all simultaneously? It felt impossible. And yet now, you can drive while holding a conversation, while listening to music, while thinking about what you'll make for dinner. Your unconscious mind has taken 1,000 small components of driving and woven them into a single, seamless skill. This process of combination, of integration, happens through repetition. Each time you drive, the threads grow stronger, the pattern more unified, until what once required your complete attention becomes something you can do while barely paying attention at all. There's a fascinating phenomenon that marketers discovered decades ago, though they've never quite stopped exploiting it. If you hear a statement repeated often enough, your mind begins to perceive it as more true, regardless of its actual accuracy. Psychologists call this the illusory truth effect. Show someone the statement "the Atlantic Ocean is the largest ocean on Earth" once, and they might pause, uncertain. Show it to them 5 times over the course of a week, and they become more confident it's true, even though it's false, even though the Pacific is larger. Your unconscious mind uses repetition as a shortcut for truth. After all, in the natural world, the things you encounter most often usually are real, important, and worth remembering. But in our modern world of advertising and media, this ancient wisdom of your unconscious mind can sometimes lead you astray, mistaking familiarity for fact. Now, let's travel deeper into the strange landscape of unconscious learning. There's a condition called blind sight that reveals something almost impossible to believe. People with damage to their visual cortex report being completely blind in parts of their visual field. They genuinely cannot consciously see anything there. And yet, when researchers place objects in those blind areas and ask these people to guess where the objects are, they guess correctly far more often than chance would allow. They can't see, but some part of their unconscious mind can still process visual information and guide their behavior. When asked how they knew where to reach, they can only say, "I don't know, I just guessed." The seeing is happening somewhere beneath consciousness, in neural pathways carved by years of repetition, now running their patterns in darkness. Consider the way you recognize a friend's face in a crowd. You don't consciously think, "Yes, that nose is shaped correctly, those eyes are the right distance apart, that jawline matches my memory." Instead, recognition arrives as a feeling, instant and complete. Your unconscious mind has processed thousands of faces throughout your lifetime, extracting patterns and rules about what makes each face unique. Through repetition, seeing your friend again and again, a template is formed in your brain, and now recognition happens faster than thought, faster than words, in that mysterious space where your unconscious mind works its quiet magic. There's an experiment that demonstrates just how deeply repetition shapes your perception. Researchers showed people images that were subtly manipulated, faces with eyes slightly too far apart, or landscapes with colors that didn't quite match reality. At first, people noticed these images were strange, unsettling. But after viewing them repeatedly over several days, the distorted images began to seem normal, even pleasant. When later shown the original, unmanipulated versions, people now found those to be strange and off-putting. Your unconscious mind had recalibrated what normal meant, based purely on repetition. This is how your sense of reality itself is flexible, constantly being reshaped by what you encounter most often. And this brings us to a tender truth about change, about growth, about becoming someone new. When you repeat a new behavior, even if it feels unnatural at first, your unconscious mind begins to update its sense of who you are. The first time you speak kindly to yourself in the mirror, it might feel absurd, performative. But by the 10th time, the 50th time, something has shifted. The words begin to feel less like a script and more like a truth. Your unconscious mind is endlessly patient, endlessly willing to learn new patterns, if only you're willing to repeat them long enough for the learning to take hold. As you rest here now, breathing slowly, your unconscious mind is sorting through the day's experiences, strengthening some memories, letting others fade, finding patterns you didn't know you were looking for. It works while you sleep, while you dream, while you surrender to the darkness. There's a moment that happens every night, a threshold you cross without noticing. Your thoughts begin to drift, to fragment, to lose their crisp edges. The boundary between awake and asleep is not a line but a gradual fade, and somewhere in that twilight space, your unconscious mind steps fully forward, taking the stage it's been waiting for all day. In sleep laboratories around the world, researchers have watched something extraordinary unfold. When people learn a new physical skill during the day, playing a musical sequence on a piano, or navigating a complex maze, their performance actually improves overnight, even though they haven't practiced. Brain scans reveal that during sleep, particularly during REM sleep when dreams arrive, the exact same neural patterns that fired during practice begin firing again, spontaneously, repeatedly. Your unconscious mind is practicing for you, rehearsing the movements, strengthening the connections, while your conscious awareness dreams of flying or falling or finding yourself in a childhood home. This is not rest, this is work, the deep work of becoming. Consider what happens when you can't quite remember a word or a name. It sits just beyond reach, frustratingly close but impossible to grasp. You try harder, focusing intently, but the memory refuses to surface. So you give up, you move on to other things, you forget you were even searching. And then, hours later, sometimes in the middle of an entirely different activity, the word simply arrives. It appears in your mind fully formed, announced by a feeling of relief and recognition. This is your unconscious mind continuing to search long after your conscious mind has abandoned the quest. While you were thinking about something else entirely, deep processes were still sorting through memory, still following threads, still working toward the answer you needed. There's a phenomenon that artists and writers have known about for centuries, though scientists have only recently begun to understand it. The incubation effect shows that taking a break from a difficult problem often leads to breakthrough insights. When you step away from a challenge, when you stop consciously wrestling with it, your unconscious mind continues processing it through different pathways, making unexpected connections, trying approaches your conscious mind never would have considered. The solutions that arrive this way often feel like they come from nowhere, like gifts delivered in the night. But they come from you, from the part of you that never stops working, never stops seeking patterns, never stops trying to understand. Now, imagine learning a new language. In the beginning, every sentence is a puzzle to be consciously decoded. You must think about each word, recall each grammatical rule, deliberately construct your meaning. But there's a moment, usually after months or years of exposure, when something shifts. You stop translating in your head and begin thinking directly in the new language. Words flow without conscious effort. Grammar arranges itself automatically. This is the moment when language has migrated from conscious knowledge to unconscious fluency, when repetition has transformed calculation into intuition. Your unconscious mind has absorbed the patterns so completely that it can now generate infinite new sentences you've never heard before, following rules you couldn't explicitly state if asked. In the 1990s, researchers discovered something unsettling about memory and repetition. They conducted an experiment where they gave people detailed descriptions of childhood events, some real, taken from family members, and some completely fabricated. After being asked to recall and elaborate on these events several times, about 25% of people developed rich, detailed memories of events that never actually happened. They could describe the weather that day, the clothes they were wearing, the emotions they felt, all from repetition of a false suggestion. Your unconscious mind treats rehearsal as evidence of reality. What you imagine repeatedly can become what you remember actually experiencing. This is both the danger and the opportunity of repetition. It can rewrite your past, for better or worse. There's a strange talent that emerges from repetition, one you might not have noticed you possess. Expert chess players can glance at a board mid-game and, seconds later, reproduce the entire position from memory, but only if the pieces are arranged in ways that could actually occur in a real game. If the pieces are placed randomly, their memory is no better than a beginner's. Through thousands of hours of play, their unconscious minds have learned the deep patterns of chess, the way pieces relate to each other, the structures that emerge from strategic play. They're not remembering individual pieces, they're recognizing meaningful patterns, chunks of information that their unconscious mind has cataloged through endless repetition. This chunking process is happening in your own life, in domains you might never have considered. When you read these words, you're not consciously processing each individual letter. You're not thinking "the" forms the word "the dot." Instead, your unconscious mind recognizes entire words as single units, perhaps even common phrases as unified chunks. Through years of reading, repetition has transformed what was once painstaking letter-by-letter decoding into effortless comprehension. You can now think about the ideas in these sentences rather than thinking about the sentences themselves. And here is perhaps the most profound gift of repetition: it frees your conscious mind. Every skill that becomes automatic, every pattern that sinks into unconscious mastery, creates space for new learning, new awareness, new growth. When you first learned to walk, it consumed your complete attention. Now you walk without thought, and your consciousness is free to contemplate the stars, compose poetry, solve mathematical equations, dream about tomorrow. Your unconscious mind carries the accumulated wisdom of all your repeated experiences, bearing that weight so effortlessly that you forget it's even working. As you lie here breathing, your heart maintaining its rhythm through unconscious repetition, your body healing itself through processes perfected over millions of years of evolution, you are surrounded by the invisible architecture your unconscious mind has built, all the patterns it has learned, all the skills it has automated, all the quiet knowledge it has gathered. There's a scent that can stop you mid-step. Perhaps it's a particular perfume, or the smell of rain on hot pavement, or bread baking in an oven. And suddenly you're not here anymore, you're 8 years old, or 17, or standing in a place you haven't thought about in decades. The memory arrives complete, vivid, drenched in emotion. This is because scent bypasses the usual processing centers of your brain and connects almost directly to the hippocampus and amygdala, your memory and emotion centers. A smell encountered repeatedly during an emotional time becomes a key, and your unconscious mind keeps that key safe for years, sometimes for a lifetime, waiting for the lock it fits. In the 1980s, a graduate student named Carolyn Rovee Collier conducted a simple but profound experiment with infants. She tied a ribbon from a mobile hanging above a crib to a baby's ankle so that when the baby kicked, the mobile would move. Babies quickly learned this connection and would kick enthusiastically to make the mobile dance. But here's what surprised everyone: when researchers brought babies back weeks later and simply showed them the same mobile, without attaching the ribbon, the babies immediately began kicking. They were 2 or 3 months old. They couldn't talk. They likely had no conscious memory of the previous experience. But their unconscious minds remembered, and their bodies knew what to do. Your earliest learning, before language, before conscious memory, is still there, still guiding you, encoded in patterns of response you can't verbally recall but somehow still know. Think about prejudice for a moment, not the loud, explicit kind, but the quieter type that lives beneath awareness. Research on implicit bias has shown that people often hold unconscious associations that contradict their conscious values. Someone who genuinely believes in equality might still show, on reaction time tests, subtle unconscious preferences formed through repeated exposure to cultural stereotypes. These aren't choices, they're the residue of patterns encountered again and again, in media, in casual conversations, in the structure of the world itself. Your unconscious mind absorbs these repetitions without judgment, without analysis, simply noting what appears together frequently. Understanding this doesn't excuse bias, but it reveals something important. Changing these unconscious patterns requires new repetitions, new associations, new experiences that gradually rewrite the old learning. There's a curious thing that happens when you're learning something difficult. You struggle, you fail, you try again. The frustration builds. And then you stop for the day, disappointed. But when you return to the task the next day or the next week, you discover that somehow, mysteriously, you've improved. This is called offline learning, and it happens because your unconscious mind continues processing and consolidating skills during the periods between practice sessions. The repetition doesn't need to be continuous to be effective. Sometimes the spaces between attempts are when the deepest integration occurs, when your unconscious mind sorts through what worked and what didn't, strengthening some connections and pruning others. Now consider something even more subtle: the way you stand, the way you hold your shoulders, the expression your face settles into when you're not aware of it. These postures and expressions are shaped by repetition, by the emotional states you've inhabited most often, by the physical positions you've held most frequently. If you've spent years hunched over a computer, your body learns that curve. If you've spent years being cautious, worried, your face learns those patterns. Your unconscious mind treats repeated positions as the default, as home. But this also means that consciously choosing new postures, new expressions, and holding them repeatedly, can gradually teach your unconscious mind a new default. You can, slowly, reshape the very structure through which you meet the world. There's a beautiful and slightly melancholic study about couples who have been together for many decades. Researchers found that long-married partners begin to develop similar facial features, not because they were similar to begin with, but because they've spent so many years unconsciously mimicking each other's expressions. The slight raise of an eyebrow, the particular way of smiling, the unconscious furrow of concern, these get repeated thousands of times, and slowly, the muscles develop similar patterns, the faces actually reshape themselves. We become, through repetition, partially made of the people we spend our time with. Their patterns become our patterns. Their rhythms influence our rhythms. Love, in this sense, is also a form of mutual learning that happens far beneath conscious awareness. Consider those moments when you felt suddenly, inexplicably anxious or sad, and you can't identify why. Your unconscious mind is sensitive to anniversary effects, subtle responses to dates, times of year, or environmental cues associated with past difficult experiences. You might not consciously remember that this was the week your relationship ended 3 years ago, or the time of year someone you loved became ill, but your unconscious mind has been counting, marking time, noticing the patterns of seasons in light and temperature. It remembers through feeling rather than through narrative, through bodily response rather than through story. There's a technique that therapists have used for decades, based on the power of repetition to reshape unconscious response. Exposure therapy works by having people repeatedly encounter what they fear in safe, controlled circumstances. Someone afraid of dogs might first look at pictures of dogs, then watch videos, then sit in a room with a calm dog, then eventually pet one, each step repeated until the fear response diminishes. Through repetition, the unconscious mind learns a new association: dog plus safety, dog plus calm, dog plus nothing terrible happening. The old pattern doesn't vanish entirely, your unconscious mind rarely forgets, but it becomes weaker, quieter, less likely to dominate your response. New repetitions can write new stories over old ones. And so you begin to see, you are, in many ways, a living record of everything you've repeatedly experienced. Your fears, your comforts, your automatic responses, all of them carved into neural pathways through repetition. But this is not a prison. The same mechanism that learned your limitations can learn your freedom. Every time you repeat a new behavior, a new thought pattern, a new way of being, you're teaching your unconscious mind that this, too, is possible. This, too, can become automatic. As you rest now, your breathing falling into its natural rhythm, you are both the sum of all your past repetitions and the beginning of all your future ones. There is a rhythm to your body that you've never consciously noticed, yet it governs much of your life. Your body temperature rises and falls in a predictable pattern over each 24-hour period, typically peaking in late afternoon and reaching its lowest point in the early morning hours before dawn. This circadian rhythm isn't something you decide, it's something your unconscious mind maintains through repetition, through the daily cycle of light and dark that has repeated itself since the first day of your life. Your cells have been counting sunrises, And they know, without your awareness, what time it is. In the 1960s, a French scientist named Michel Siffre descended into a cave, deep underground, with no watch, no clock, no sunlight to mark the passage of time. He wanted to discover what would happen to his sense of time without external cues. And something fascinating emerged. Even without any time markers, his body maintained a roughly 24-hour cycle of sleeping and waking. It drifted slightly, his internal day stretched to about 25 hours, but the rhythm persisted. Your unconscious mind carries within it an ancient clock, wound by millions of years of evolution, kept accurate by the repetition of day following night following day. You are, in a sense, made of rhythms. Think about the last time you tried to break a habit. Perhaps you wanted to stop checking your phone first thing in the morning, or stop eating a particular food, or stop responding with anger to a particular trigger. And you discovered how extraordinarily difficult it was. This is because habits create physical changes in your brain. The neural pathways associated with habitual behaviors actually become myelinated, wrapped in a fatty sheath that makes signals travel faster and more efficiently along them. Your unconscious mind has made these pathways into highways, smooth and fast, because you've traveled them so many times. Breaking a habit isn't just about willpower, it's about gradually building new highways while the old ones slowly fade from disuse. There's a strange phenomenon that emergency room doctors have observed for decades, though it took years for researchers to study it formally. Hospital admissions for certain conditions tend to spike on Mondays: heart attacks, strokes, even suicide attempts. Your unconscious mind is tracking more than just time of day, it's responding to the patterns of your week, the rhythm of work and rest, obligation and freedom. The stress that accumulates through repetition of the weekly cycle manifests in your body in ways your conscious mind might not recognize until the symptoms become impossible to ignore. Your unconscious knows it's Monday before you open your eyes. Now, consider something more intimate, the way you've learned to read the people closest to you. After spending significant time with someone, you develop an unconscious ability to detect subtle shifts in their emotional state, a slight tension in their voice, a particular way they hold their shoulders, a fraction of a second delay before they answer. You couldn't explain exactly what you're noticing, couldn't articulate the precise cues, but through repetition, through hundreds or thousands of interactions, your unconscious mind has built a detailed model of their patterns. You know when something is wrong before they tell you, before perhaps they fully know it themselves. This is emotional pattern recognition operating beneath the level of conscious thought. There's a counterintuitive finding from research on skill acquisition that reveals something profound about how your unconscious mind learns. When people practice a skill with slight variations, shooting basketball free throws from slightly different distances, or practicing a musical piece at slightly different tempos, they ultimately develop greater mastery than people who practice in exactly the same way every time. This seems backwards. Shouldn't perfect repetition create perfect learning? But your unconscious mind isn't just recording specific instances, it's extracting underlying principles, building flexible understanding. The variations force your unconscious mind to learn the essence of the skill rather than just memorizing one specific execution. True mastery comes from repetition with diversity, not repetition with rigidity. Consider the phenomenon of déjà vu, that eerie sensation that you've experienced this exact moment before. Scientists believe déjà vu occurs when there's a slight mismatch in the timing of your brain's memory systems, when the feeling of familiarity fires just before the conscious experience is fully processed. Your unconscious mind, which processes information faster than your conscious awareness, sends a signal of recognition, but there's nothing for it to recognize. It's a ghost of repetition, a false echo. Your unconscious mind is so attuned to patterns, so ready to recognize them, that sometimes it sees repetition where none exists. There's a profound truth hidden in the way children learn language. No one explicitly teaches children the complex grammatical rules of their native language, yet by age 5, most children speak with remarkable grammatical sophistication. They've absorbed these patterns purely through exposure, through the repetition of hearing language used correctly thousands and thousands of times. Their unconscious minds extracted the rules without anyone stating them, without formal lessons, without conscious effort. This reveals something essential: your unconscious mind is a pattern-finding genius, capable of discovering structure in chaos, rules and randomness, through nothing more than repeated exposure. And here's something that might change how you think about change itself. Research shows that it takes, on average, 66 days for a new behavior to become automatic, but the range is enormous, from 18 days to 254 days, depending on the complexity of the behavior and the individual. There's no magic number, no exact point where the transformation occurs. Instead, there's a gradual fade, a slow transition where conscious effort becomes less and less necessary, where your unconscious mind gradually accepts this new pattern as part of who you are. The process is invisible, unmarked by any clear boundary, but it's always happening. Every repetition is a small deposit in the account of change, and your unconscious mind is keeping track, accumulating the weight of evidence that this new way of being is real. As you lie here now, your heart beating its ancient rhythm, your lungs breathing their patient pattern, you are a symphony of repetitions, some inherited from ancestors you never met, some learned yesterday, all playing together in unconscious harmony. Imagine a garden where seeds are planted without your knowledge, where some plants grow in shadow while others reach toward light you cannot see. This is the landscape of your unconscious mind, and the seeds are planted by repetition, some deliberately, some accidentally, some by forces you never chose to let in. There's a study that haunts the edges of psychology, one that reveals both the beauty and the burden of unconscious learning. Researchers found that children of depressed parents, even before they can speak, begin to mirror their parents' patterns, reduced facial expressions, less eye contact, quieter vocalizations. These infants aren't consciously choosing these behaviors, they're absorbing them through repetition, through thousands of small interactions. Your unconscious mind learned how to be human by watching other humans, by repeating what you saw repeated. Before you had words for emotion, you learned emotional patterns. Before you understood relationships, you were already practicing them. The first garden was planted in you before you knew what growing meant. Now consider something you might not have noticed about your own behavior. When you're in conversation with someone, you unconsciously begin to mirror their posture, their gestures, their speech patterns, even the speed of their breathing. This is called the chameleon effect, and it happens automatically, beneath awareness. Through evolution, through countless repetitions across millennia, your unconscious mind learned that synchrony builds connection, that matching creates trust. You've been doing this your entire life, adjusting your rhythm to match the rhythms of others, and you've probably never once noticed it happening. Your unconscious mind is always seeking harmony, always trying to build bridges through subtle imitation. There's a peculiar finding from neuroscience that reveals how deeply repetition shapes perception itself. When people wear glasses that turn their vision upside down, literally inverting everything they see, after several days of continuous wear, their brains spontaneously flip the image back. The world appears right side up again, even though the glasses are still inverting it. Through repetition, through the constant stream of inverted visual information, the unconscious mind recalibrates what normal means. And here's the startling part: when they remove the glasses after weeks of wearing them, the world appears upside down again, and they must wait days for their unconscious minds to readjust. Your sense of reality itself is not fixed, it's whatever pattern your unconscious mind has most recently learned to expect. Think about the voices in your head, the internal dialogue that narrates your experience. Research suggests that your inner voice often uses the same tone, the same phrases, the same criticisms that were repeatedly directed at you during your formative years. If you were told often enough that you were careless, clumsy, too sensitive, too much, not enough, these assessments became the voice you now use to speak to yourself. Your unconscious mind recorded not just the words but the inflection, the implied disappointment, the subtle shadings of judgment. And now it plays them back, so seamlessly integrated into your sense of self that you might believe they're original thoughts rather than ancient repetitions, echoes of voices from long ago. In the 1970s, a researcher named Ellen Langer conducted an experiment that would reshape how we understand the mind-body connection. She brought elderly men to a retreat designed to look exactly like the world of 20 years earlier, the magazines, the music, the decor, everything from their younger days. After just 1 week of living as if it were the past, the men showed measurable improvements in physical health, better hearing, improved vision, increased strength, and flexibility. By surrounding them with the repeated cues of their younger selves, the researchers had somehow awakened younger patterns in their unconscious minds. The body responded to what the unconscious mind believed was real. Repetition doesn't just shape thought, it shapes flesh, bone, the very cells that constitute you. There's something called semantic satiation that you can experience right now if you repeat any word over and over. Say a word, any word, 30 or 40 times in rapid succession. Fork, 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 fork. After enough repetitions, the word begins to lose its meaning, becoming just sounds, just rhythm, stripped of the significance it once carried. This reveals something crucial: meaning itself requires a delicate balance. Too little repetition and nothing sticks, nothing becomes familiar enough to matter. Too much repetition and the meaning dissolves, becomes numb, loses its power to affect you. Your unconscious mind needs variety within repetition, needs the pattern to repeat but not to the point of absolute predictability. Even the deepest learning requires some space to breathe. Consider the placebo effect, one of the most powerful demonstrations of unconscious learning in medicine. Studies show that placebo effects have actually gotten stronger over the past few decades, not because the fake pills have changed, but because real medicine has gotten more effective, and we've all witnessed this repeatedly. Your unconscious mind has learned, through countless experiences and cultural messages, that pills make you better. So now, even an inert sugar pill can trigger genuine physiological changes, reduced pain, improved symptoms, measurable shifts in brain chemistry, because your unconscious mind has learned the pattern: taking medicine leads to healing. The repetition of this association across your lifetime has made it real in your body. And here's a tender truth about memory and identity. Psychologists have found that people tend to remember their past selves as more different from who they are now than they actually were. You look back 5 years, 10 years, and think, I was so different then, but often the changes are smaller than they feel. And yet, paradoxically, people also tend to underestimate how much they'll change in the future, believing their current self is somehow the final form. Your unconscious mind is constantly updating your sense of self, but it does so gradually, through the repetition of daily experience. The you of today is so familiar that your unconscious mind assumes this is simply who you are, forgetting that you're still in the process of becoming, still being shaped by the patterns you're currently repeating. As the night deepens around you, your unconscious mind continues its patient work, sorting, filing, strengthening some connections while letting others fade, preparing you for tomorrow by processing all the repetitions of today. There is a weight you carry that has no mass. It lives in the way you hesitate before speaking, in the way you enter a room, in the split-second decisions you make without deciding. Psychologists have discovered that traumatic experiences can create what they call implicit memories, memories stored in your unconscious mind without any conscious recollection of the event itself. A child who experiences something overwhelming before they can speak may have no narrative memory of what happened, no story to tell, yet their body remembers. Their nervous system remembers. Years later, they might find themselves inexplicably anxious in situations that echo, in some subtle way, that early experience. The unconscious mind is keeping a record written in a language the conscious mind cannot read. Now think about your breathing. Right now, as you notice it, you can control it, slow it down, speed it up, hold it. But for the past few minutes, before you read these words, you weren't controlling it at all. Your breathing was being managed by your unconscious mind, which adjusts your breath rate based on hundreds of factors: your physical activity, your emotional state, the oxygen and carbon dioxide levels in your blood. The moment you stop paying attention, it will take over again, breathing for you with a wisdom accumulated over millions of years of evolution. Your unconscious mind is always there, a faithful guardian managing the systems that keep you alive, requiring nothing from you but trust. There's a phenomenon called priming that reveals just how suggestible your unconscious mind can be through subtle repetitions. In one famous study, researchers had people unscramble sentences containing words related to old age, Florida, wrinkled, retired, gray. Afterward, when participants left the testing room, they walked significantly more slowly down the hallway than people who had unscrambled neutral sentences. They weren't conscious of walking slowly. They didn't remember the words they'd unscrambled. But their unconscious minds had been primed, activated by the repetition of age-related concepts, and their bodies followed patterns associated with those concepts. You are more permeable than you realize, more shaped by the small, repeated inputs around you than your conscious mind might want to believe. Consider the people you've lost, not just to death, but to distance, to the natural drifting of lives moving in different directions. Research shows that close relationships create literal overlap in how your brain processes self and other. The neural patterns that activate when you think about yourself also activate, partially, when you think about someone you're deeply close to. When that person is no longer in your life, when you're no longer having those repeated daily interactions, your unconscious mind must slowly, painfully reorganize. The patterns that included them must be rewritten. This is why grief and loss can feel like losing part of yourself, because, in a neurological sense, you have. The repetition of their presence had woven them into the fabric of your unconscious mind. There's a skill you possess that seems almost magical when you consider how it works. When you catch a ball thrown to you, you're solving a complex calculus problem in real time, predicting the ball's trajectory, calculating its speed, adjusting your hand position to intercept it, all without conscious mathematical thought. Your unconscious mind learned this through repetition, through childhood games of catch, through evolution's patient teaching across countless generations. The equations are running, the predictions are being calculated, but all of it happens in darkness, in the hidden chambers where your unconscious mind performs miracles you've learned to take for granted. Now, consider something more unsettling. Studies on false confessions reveal that innocent people, after hours of interrogation using repeated suggestions and implications, sometimes come to genuinely believe they committed crimes they did not commit. They don't just confess falsely, they create memories of the crime, details that feel real, that carry the weight of authentic recollection. Through repetition of suggestion, through the exhausted state where conscious critical thinking weakens, the unconscious mind begins to construct a narrative from the repeated inputs it's receiving. Your memory is not a recording, it's a story your unconscious mind tells you, and that story can be rewritten through repetition, through the persistent reshaping of the narrative you hear. There's a beautiful paradox in how your unconscious mind processes emotion. Research shows that suppressing emotions, trying not to feel what you feel, actually makes those emotions stronger and more persistent over time. Each time you push a feeling away, each time you repeat the pattern of avoidance, your unconscious mind learns that this emotion is dangerous, something to be feared. And what your unconscious mind fears, it amplifies. But here's the gentle truth hidden in this finding: the opposite is also true. Repeatedly allowing yourself to feel emotions, to sit with them without judgment, gradually teaches your unconscious mind that feelings are safe, that they can be experienced and will pass. The pattern you repeat becomes the pattern you live. Think about mastery in any domain: a musician who's practiced for thousands of hours, a surgeon who's performed the same procedure hundreds of times, a writer who's written 1,000,000 words. At the highest levels of skill, people describe entering flow states where conscious effort disappears entirely and the action feels effortless, almost as if it's happening by itself. This is your unconscious mind operating at full capacity, freed from the slower deliberations of conscious thought. Through repetition, through practice so extensive that every element has become automatic, the unconscious mind can perform with a grace and precision that conscious control could never achieve. You are most capable when you are least aware of your own capability. And so you begin to understand, the unconscious mind is not just a repository of forgotten things, not just a basement where uncomfortable truths are stored. It is an active, learning, constantly adapting system that carries the weight of all your experience, that performs the invisible labor of keeping you alive, that learns from every repetition whether you intend it to or not. As you sink deeper into rest, your unconscious mind is already at work on tomorrow, already processing today, already preparing the patterns that will guide you when you wake. Before you learned to speak, you were already communicating. Before you had words for your needs, you had cries, gestures, expressions that others somehow understood. Researchers have found that mothers can identify their own newborn's cry from among many other babies' cries with remarkable accuracy, often within just days of birth. This recognition happens unconsciously, instantly. Through repetition, through the pattern of that particular cry heard again and again, the unconscious mind learns to distinguish one voice from all others. You are teaching people to understand you before you understood yourself. There's a curious thing that happens in conversation that reveals how deeply your unconscious mind is listening, even when your conscious attention wanders. Studies show that if someone says your name in a conversation you're not consciously attending to, across a crowded room, or on the other side of a party, your attention immediately pivots toward it. This is called the cocktail party effect, and it demonstrates that your unconscious mind is constantly monitoring all auditory input, filtering through the noise, alert for patterns that matter to you. The repetition of your name throughout your life has made it a signal your unconscious mind will never ignore, a pattern it will always recognize, even through layers of other sound. Now think about the last time you learned someone was talking about you behind your back, or the last time you discovered that someone's pleasant demeanor toward you masked resentment or judgment. Your unconscious mind often knows these things before your conscious mind accepts them. You might have felt vaguely uneasy around that person, sensed something off, noticed tiny inconsistencies you couldn't quite name. Your unconscious mind is reading micro-expressions, voice patterns, behavioral inconsistencies, all the small repeated signals that don't quite align. It's trying to tell you something, but the message arrives as feeling rather than thought, as intuition rather than evidence. Sometimes the whisper you dismissed was actually wisdom. There's a phenomenon in music that reveals something profound about pattern and expectation. When composers create tension in music, they're often violating the patterns your unconscious mind has learned to expect from a lifetime of listening. A chord that doesn't resolve, a rhythm that breaks the established pattern, a melody that goes where your unconscious mind didn't predict, these create a feeling of unease, of anticipation, of something unfinished. And when the resolution finally comes, when the pattern completes itself, your unconscious mind floods you with satisfaction, with relief, sometimes even with joy. You are, in this moment, feeling the pleasure of a prediction fulfilled, of a pattern recognized and completed. Music is a conversation between the composer and your unconscious mind's accumulated knowledge of how sounds relate to one another. Consider the way you know how to gauge a person's mood from the way they say hello. The same word, the same two syllables, can communicate warmth, irritation, distraction, excitement, sadness, and you can distinguish between these instantly, unconsciously. Through tens of thousands of repetitions across your lifetime, your unconscious mind has learned to extract meaning from tone, pace, pitch, emphasis. You're not consciously analyzing the acoustic properties of their voice, you're feeling the meaning directly. Your unconscious mind has become fluent in a language that exists beneath language, in the music of human speech. There's a study that might change how you think about first impressions. Research shows that people form stable impressions of others within the first 7 seconds of meeting them, and these impressions are remarkably resistant to change, even in the face of contradictory evidence. Your unconscious mind is making rapid assessments based on countless micro-cues, posture, facial expression, tone of voice, grooming, clothing, all filtered through patterns learned from every previous person you've encountered. This speed was evolutionarily essential. Our ancestors needed to quickly assess friend or threat. But in our complex modern world, these rapid unconscious judgments, formed before conscious reflection can temper them, can lead us astray, cementing opinions before we've truly seen who someone is. Now consider something more intimate, the way you've learned to comfort yourself. When you're distressed, you might unconsciously rock slightly, hum, wrap your arms around yourself, or engage in other self-soothing behaviors, and these are often repetitions of the ways you were comforted as a child. If you were held and rocked, you might rock yourself. If you were spoken to in soft tones, you might talk gently to yourself. Your unconscious mind recorded not just that comfort was needed but the specific patterns through which comfort arrived, and now it recreates those patterns, trying to give yourself what you once received. You are, in moments of pain, both the child who needs comfort and the parent providing it, repeating roles learned so long ago you don't remember learning them. There's a peculiar finding about expertise that reveals a limitation of conscious awareness. When experts in a field are asked to explain exactly how they make decisions, they often give explanations that don't match what they actually do. A chess grandmaster explains their decision with logical reasoning, but eye-tracking studies show they're actually responding to patterns their unconscious mind recognizes instantly. A doctor describes their diagnostic process rationally, but they often reach the correct diagnosis before they can articulate why. Through massive repetition, through thousands of hours of experience, your unconscious mind learns patterns too complex for conscious explanation. You know more than you know you know. Your deepest expertise lives in a place you cannot fully access through introspection. And here's something to carry with you into sleep. Research on learning during sleep suggests that while you cannot learn entirely new information while sleeping, your unconscious mind can strengthen and consolidate what you encountered while awake. If you study before sleeping, if you practice before resting, your unconscious mind continues the work through the night, replaying patterns, strengthening connections, making tomorrow's version of you slightly more skilled than today's. Sleep is not absence, it's a different kind of presence, a different kind of work, invisible but essential. As your breathing deepens and your thoughts begin to scatter like leaves on water, your unconscious mind remains alert, processing, learning, preparing, always faithful to its ancient task of keeping you, changing you, growing you through the darkness. Maintaining the soothing, drowsy rhythm. Close your eyes and imagine walking into your home. You know, without thinking, where each light switch is, where each piece of furniture stands, how many steps to take before you reach the kitchen. This mental map you carry is constantly being updated by your unconscious mind, not just when you consciously notice changes, but continuously, automatically, with every journey through familiar space. Your unconscious mind is always building models of the world, always predicting what will happen next, and when reality matches prediction, you don't notice anything at all. It's only when expectation and reality diverge, when a chair has been moved, when a door that should be open is closed, that conscious awareness suddenly flares. Your experience of normalcy is actually your unconscious mind successfully predicting the world around you, over and over, moment by moment. There's a study from the 1950s that reveals something unsettling about perception itself. Researchers showed people playing cards, ordinary playing cards from a deck, but some cards had been altered. A red 6 of spades, a black 4 of hearts. At first, when the cards were shown very briefly, people simply didn't see the wrongness. Their unconscious minds, expecting the patterns they'd seen thousands of times before, overrode the actual sensory input and showed them what should be there. Only when the exposure time was lengthened did people begin to notice something was wrong, and even then, many experienced profound discomfort, confusion, sometimes even anger. Your unconscious mind will literally change what you perceive to match what you expect, until the evidence becomes overwhelming. You are not seeing the world as it is, you're seeing your unconscious mind's prediction of the world, corrected only when the prediction fails dramatically enough to demand attention. Think about phantom limb syndrome, a phenomenon that haunts amputees. People who have lost an arm or leg often continue to feel that limb, sometimes for years or decades after it's gone. They feel it itch, feel it move, feel it in positions that cause pain. This happens because your unconscious mind maintains a body map, or representation of yourself built through a lifetime of sensory input and movement. The repetition of having that limb for 20, 30, 40 years created such a strong pattern that the unconscious mind continues generating the sensation even when the source is absent. You are, in a sense, always living slightly in the past, in the body your unconscious mind has learned to expect from years of repetition. Now consider something gentler, the way you recognize beauty. What you find beautiful is largely determined by repeated exposure during a critical period in your development. The faces you saw most often between ages 5 and 9 tend to shape what facial features you find attractive as an adult. The landscapes you grew up with, the colors that surrounded you, the proportions and patterns that were repeated in your environment, these become the unconscious template for what feels aesthetically right. Beauty isn't just in the eye of the beholder, it's in the unconscious mind of someone who learned, through repetition, what home looks like, what safety looks like, what rightness looks like. There's a curious phenomenon that happens in language, one that reveals how your unconscious mind predicts words before they arrive. When people listen to speech in their native language, brain scans show that they begin activating the motor areas associated with producing speech. Their unconscious minds are subtly preparing to make the mouth movements for words they're predicting will come next. You're not just passively receiving language, you're unconsciously anticipating it, generating possibilities, preparing responses. Through endless repetition of conversation throughout your life, your unconscious mind has learned the patterns of dialogue so well that it's always slightly ahead, always guessing what comes next. This is why interrupting feels natural. Your unconscious mind already completed their sentence in your head. Consider the experience of déjà vu, the feeling that you've dreamed this moment before, that what's happening now appeared to you in sleep days or weeks ago. While some cases might be genuine precognitive dreams, most are likely instances of your unconscious mind creating false memories of dreams, constructing the sensation of prior experience after the fact. Your unconscious mind is so skilled at pattern recognition, so adept at prediction, that when something happens, it can instantly generate the feeling that it knew this was coming, that it saw this before. Memory and prediction blur together in the unconscious mind. Both are patterns, both are constructions, both feel equally real. There's something called muscle memory that isn't actually stored in muscles at all. It's in your brain, in the motor cortex and cerebellum, where repeated movements create such refined neural patterns that your body can execute complex sequences with minimal conscious guidance. A pianist's fingers finding the right keys, a dancer's body knowing the next movement, an athlete's practiced swing, these aren't muscles remembering, but unconscious minds that have repeated the pattern so many times that it's become automatic, encoded in neural circuitry that fires faster than conscious thought. You've carved rivers through the landscape of your brain, and now action flows through those channels effortlessly, inevitably. And here's something that might explain experiences you've had but never quite understood. Research shows that your unconscious mind processes sensory information about 500 milliseconds before your conscious awareness catches up. That's half a second during which your unconscious mind knows something your conscious mind doesn't yet know. Sometimes this manifests as intuition, a feeling that something's wrong before you consciously notice what's wrong, a sense of attraction before you've consciously registered the person who attracted you, an impulse to move before you've seen the threat you're moving away from. What you call instinct is often just your unconscious mind acting on information your conscious mind hasn't processed yet. You are always half a second behind yourself, following where your unconscious mind has already gone. As the boundary between waking and sleeping grows thinner, as your thoughts become more liquid, more prone to drift and transformation, your unconscious mind is preparing to take you deeper, into territories where it works without any conscious interference at all. There is an invisible dance happening in every interaction, a choreography you perform without knowing the steps. When two people have a conversation, their heart rates begin to synchronize, their breathing patterns align, even their brain waves start to harmonize, and this happens unconsciously, automatically, beneath any awareness. Your unconscious mind is constantly reaching toward the people around you, trying to create resonance, trying to build bridges of shared rhythm. You are never quite as separate as you feel. The boundaries between self and other are more permeable than your conscious mind realizes. In the 1990s, researchers discovered something remarkable about how we understand other people's actions. They found neurons in the brain that fire both when you perform an action yourself and when you watch someone else perform the same action. They called these mirror neurons. When you see someone reach for a cup, grip a door handle, or smile, neurons in your own motor cortex fire as if you were doing these things yourself. Through repetition, through watching human movement throughout your entire life, your unconscious mind has learned to simulate what others are doing inside your own neural architecture. Understanding isn't just cognitive, it's felt, embodied, lived in your own brain's echo of their actions. You understand others by unconsciously becoming them, just a little, just enough. Think about the people who shaped you most deeply, parents, teachers, friends who marked turning points in your life. Psychologists have found that we unconsciously adopt the values, beliefs, and even the goals of people we spend significant time with, through a process called goal contagion. If your close friend values creativity, you become slightly more creative. If your partner values stability, you begin seeking stability. Through thousands of small interactions, through the repetition of their presence and their patterns, your unconscious mind absorbs their priorities and makes them partly your own. You are not just yourself, you are also a constellation of everyone who has touched your life deeply enough and often enough to leave an imprint. Now consider something more subtle, the way you've learned to regulate another person's emotions. In healthy relationships, people develop an unconscious ability to co-regulate. One person's calm can soothe another's anxiety, one person's excitement can lift another's mood. Through repetition, through being together through various emotional states, your unconscious minds learn each other's patterns and learn how to influence them. A touch that means you're safe, a tone of voice that means I'm here, a presence that itself becomes regulation. This is why the loss of someone close can feel like losing part of your own emotional stability. You'd learn to regulate together, and now half the system is gone. There's a phenomenon that parents know intimately but scientists have only recently begun to measure. Mothers and fathers develop the ability to distinguish their baby's different cries, hunger from pain, from tiredness, from fear, within weeks of birth. The cries might sound identical to others, but through intense repetition, through the feedback loop of responding and seeing what works, the unconscious mind learns to decode meaning from subtle variations in pitch, rhythm, intensity. This is language before language, communication recognized not through conscious analysis but through pattern matching so refined it feels like telepathy. You learn to understand need before you understood words. Consider the way you can tell when someone is lying to you, not always, not perfectly, but sometimes you just know even when you can't articulate why. Research shows that people are actually quite poor at consciously detecting lies, performing barely better than chance when asked to judge if someone is truthful. But your unconscious mind is picking up micro-expressions, vocal stress patterns, gesture inconsistencies, tiny signals you can't consciously perceive but that create a feeling of wrongness. The problem is that your conscious mind, trying to rationalize this feeling, often fixates on the wrong cues. Your unconscious mind might know the truth, but your conscious mind may not know how your unconscious mind knows it. There's a beautiful and slightly melancholic truth about how we maintain relationships across distance. Studies show that the strength of a friendship is largely determined by how recently you've interacted. Relationships naturally fade without regular contact, not because feelings change but because the neural patterns that represent that person gradually weaken without repetition. Out of sight becomes, quite literally, out of mind. Your unconscious mind allocates resources to the patterns you're currently using, and patterns unused begin to fade, like paths through a forest that become overgrown when no one walks them. This is why reconnecting with an old friend can feel both familiar and strange. The old pattern is still there, but faded, requiring effort to reactivate what once was automatic. And here's something that reveals the depth of unconscious emotional learning. Children who grow up in homes where there's chronic conflict, even if it's never directed at them, show physiological stress responses similar to soldiers in combat zones. Their unconscious minds learn that the world is dangerous, that safety is temporary, that vigilance is necessary for survival. Through repetition of witnessing tension, through the pattern of watching people they love hurt each other, their nervous systems learn a version of reality that may stay with them for decades, shaping their relationships, their trust, their capacity for rest. The unconscious mind is always learning, but not all learning is chosen, and not all patterns serve the person they shape. Yet here is hope hidden in this darkness. Just as negative patterns can be learned through repetition, so can patterns of safety, of trust, of secure attachment. New relationships, therapy, chosen family, these can provide new repetitions, new data for your unconscious mind to work with. Change is slow, frustratingly slow, because you're overriding patterns carved deep through years of repetition. But the same mechanism that learned fear can learn safety. The same unconscious mind that absorbed pain can absorb healing, if the healing is repeated often enough, consistently enough, patiently enough. As you rest here now, surrounded by the quiet of night, your unconscious mind is maintaining all the invisible connections you've built, the internal representations of everyone you love, everyone who shaped you, everyone whose patterns have become part of your patterns. There's a library inside you that has no books, no shelves, no visible catalog. Yet it holds every moment of your life, filed away in systems your conscious mind cannot access directly. Researchers studying people with amnesia have found that even when someone cannot consciously remember learning a skill, their body still knows how to perform it. A person who cannot remember practicing the piano can still play the pieces they learned before their injury. The conscious memory is gone, but the unconscious memory, encoded in neural pathways, in patterns of movement, in the silent knowledge of the body, remains. You are carrying skills, fears, preferences, and wisdom you don't remember acquiring. Think about the scars you carry, both visible and invisible. The ones on your skin tell obvious stories, but your unconscious mind carries other scars, other records of what hurt you. Studies on trauma show that the body keeps a physical record of overwhelming experiences. People who experience trauma often show exaggerated startle responses, altered stress hormone patterns, and chronic muscle tension in specific areas, even decades after the traumatic event. The conscious mind might have processed the trauma, might have made peace with it, might rarely think about it anymore. But the unconscious mind, encoded in your nervous system, in your endocrine system, in your muscles, still carries the memory. Your body remembers what your mind has tried to forget. Now consider something gentler, the way certain songs can transport you instantly to a specific moment in your past. This happens because your unconscious mind encoded the song together with the emotional and contextual details of when you first heard it repeatedly. The song becomes a key that unlocks a whole constellation of memories, sensations, and feelings. Music has this power because it was playing in the background of your life, repeating during meaningful moments, until the melody and the memory became inseparable. Your unconscious mind doesn't store them separately, it stores them as one unified experience, and accessing one immediately activates the other. There's a phenomenon that reveals how your unconscious mind is always trying to make sense of patterns, even when no pattern exists. People see faces in clouds, in the bark of trees, in the arrangement of windows on buildings. This is called pareidolia, and it happens because your unconscious mind has been trained, through millions of years of evolution and your own lifetime of experience, to prioritize face detection. Recognizing faces quickly was essential for survival. Is this person friend or foe, kin or stranger? So your unconscious mind became overzealous, seeing faces even where none exist. It would rather make a mistake and see a face that isn't there than miss a face that is. Your unconscious mind is always erring on the side of caution, always finding patterns, even in randomness. Consider the experience of highway hypnosis. You've driven for miles and suddenly realize you remember none of it. This happens because your unconscious mind has so thoroughly automated the task of driving that it can perform it with minimal conscious involvement. Your conscious mind wandered off into thoughts and daydreams, but your unconscious mind kept you in your lane, maintained your speed, responded to traffic. You were never truly unconscious, you were just conscious in a different way, with your unconscious mind handling the well-practiced patterns while your conscious awareness was elsewhere. This reveals something profound. Much of your life is being lived by your unconscious mind, while your conscious mind merely narrates selected highlights. there's a study that illuminates how prejudice operates beneath conscious awareness. Researchers found that people who consciously rejected racist beliefs still showed unconscious bias in split-second decisions: who to help first, who to perceive as threatening, whose pain to take more seriously. These biases aren't chosen, they're absorbed through cultural repetition, through media representation patterns, through the accumulated statistics your unconscious mind has gathered about which types of people appear in which contexts most frequently. Becoming aware of these unconscious patterns doesn't make them immediately disappear. They were built through thousands of repetitions, and they can only be dismantled through thousands of counter-repetitions, through deliberate, repeated exposure to information that contradicts the learned patterns. Now think about intuition, those moments when you just know something without knowing how you know it. Research suggests that intuition is often your unconscious mind's rapid processing of patterns based on extensive prior experience. A firefighter who just knows to evacuate a building moments before it collapses isn't psychic. Their unconscious mind recognized subtle cues, the sound of the fire, the heat pattern, the structure's behavior, that matched patterns from hundreds of previous fires. Their conscious mind didn't have time to analyze these cues, but their unconscious mind, trained through repetition, recognized the pattern instantly and sent an urgent signal: danger. Your unconscious mind is often wiser than your conscious thoughts, especially in domains where you have deep experience. There's something called childhood amnesia, the fact that most people cannot remember events from before age 3 or 4, even though those years were full of experiences. This isn't because the memories were never formed, it's partly because the hippocampus, essential for forming explicit long-term memories, isn't fully developed yet. But here's what's fascinating: even though you can't consciously remember those early years, research shows they profoundly shape your attachment style, your emotional patterns, your sense of safety in the world. Your unconscious mind was learning during those forgotten years, learning how relationships work, how to regulate emotions, whether the world is safe or dangerous. You are shaped by experiences you cannot remember by a part of you that remembers everything. And so you begin to see, you are walking through life guided by a vast intelligence that operates mostly in shadow, that learned from every experience you've ever had, that carries wisdom and wounds in equal measure, that knows more than you consciously understand. As sleep draws nearer, as the edges of consciousness soften and blur, your unconscious mind prepares to do its deepest work, sorting through the day's repetitions, deciding what to keep and what to release. Imagine you are standing in your childhood bedroom. Even now, decades later, you could probably walk through that room in darkness without stumbling, knowing exactly where each piece of furniture stood, how many steps from door to window. This is because your unconscious mind built what neuroscientists call a cognitive map, not just of that one room, but of every space you've spent significant time in. These maps are surprisingly detailed, encoding not just where things are, but how they relate spatially to each other. Through repetition, through walking the same paths over and over, your unconscious mind drew blueprints of your world that persist long after the rooms themselves have changed or vanished. In 2014, the Nobel Prize in Physiology was awarded for the discovery of specialized neurons called place cells and grid cells that create these internal maps. Place cells fire when you're in a specific location, like a beacon marking you are here, while grid cells fire in hexagonal patterns that create a coordinate system, like invisible longitude and latitude lines mapped across the space around you. Your unconscious mind is constantly tracking your position in space using this internal GPS, updating your location with every step. You never consciously think, I am 3 meters from the door and 2 meters from the window, but your unconscious mind knows, always knows, maintaining an awareness of where you are that makes navigation feel effortless. Now consider something stranger. Studies show that London taxi drivers, who must memorize thousands of streets and routes, actually develop enlarged hippocampi. The brain region responsible for spatial memory physically grows larger through repeated navigation. The more years they spend driving, the larger this structure becomes. Through repetition, through the constant exercise of spatial memory, the brain literally reshapes itself. You are not fixed. Your brain is sculptable, moldable, constantly reconstructing itself based on what you ask it to do repeatedly. The architecture of your mind is always under construction, always being remodeled by the patterns you live. Think about how you find your way in a new city. At first, you rely on maps, on conscious directions: turn left at the 3rd street, the hotel is past the fountain. But after several days, something shifts and you begin developing what researchers call survey knowledge, an overhead, map-like understanding of how places relate to each other. You can take shortcuts you've never walked before, can point toward landmarks you can't see. Your unconscious mind has been assembling fragments of experience into a coherent whole, connecting separate journeys into a unified map. This happens without you trying, without conscious cartography. Your unconscious mind is always building bigger pictures from small, repeated experiences. There's a condition called environmental dependency syndrome that reveals how powerfully space can trigger unconscious behavior. People with certain types of brain damage automatically engage in activities based purely on environmental cues. Seeing a bed, they lie down. Seeing a deck of cards, they begin dealing. Seeing a piano, they start to play, regardless of whether the context is appropriate. This seems bizarre, but it reveals something that's true for all of us. Your unconscious mind has learned powerful associations between locations and actions, between contexts and behaviors. The difference is that most of us retain conscious control to override these impulses. But the impulses are there. Walking into your kitchen, you feel slightly hungry. Sitting on your couch, you want to turn on the TV. The spaces you inhabit repeatedly train your unconscious mind to expect certain behaviors, to prepare for certain actions. Now consider the journey many people make 5 days a week, the commute to work. Research shows that after a route becomes habitual, people often cannot accurately recall the details of their daily drive, what streets they turned on, what landmarks they passed. The journey has become so automatic that conscious awareness disengages. But here's what's remarkable: if you change one small element of that routine, take a different route one morning, people report the entire day feeling slightly different, slightly more alert, more present. By disrupting the unconscious pattern, by forcing the unconscious mind to pay attention again, consciousness reawakens. You are most asleep when your unconscious mind is most in control, most awake when patterns are broken. There's a beautiful and haunting phenomenon that migrants and refugees often describe: phantom geography, where they unconsciously navigate their new home as if it were laid out like their original home. They turn left expecting a market that isn't there, walk 3 blocks anticipating a park that doesn't exist. The cognitive map built through years of repetition in their homeland persists, sometimes for years, overlaying itself on new terrain. Your unconscious mind holds onto its maps even when the territory is completely changed. Geography becomes memory, becomes ghost, haunting your sense of space. And here's something that reveals the unconscious mind's remarkable flexibility. Studies on virtual reality show that your unconscious mind can build just as accurate and detailed spatial maps of virtual environments as it does of physical ones. After repeatedly navigating a virtual building, you develop place cells and grid cells that fire in patterns corresponding to virtual locations. Your unconscious mind doesn't distinguish between real and simulated space. It builds maps of wherever you repeatedly go, whether that place exists in atoms or in pixels. Reality, to your unconscious mind, is simply wherever you repeatedly experience being. As you lie still in the darkness, your unconscious mind knows precisely where you are, the dimensions of this room, the location of the door, the direction of every window, and it's monitoring your position continuously, maintaining awareness even as your conscious mind drifts towards sleep. There is a clock inside you that has no hands, no numbers, no visible face. Yet it knows when to wake you, when to make you hungry, when to prepare your body for sleep. Your circadian rhythm is so precise that even without external time cues, your body temperature will rise and fall, your hormone levels will fluctuate, your alertness will wax and wane in roughly 24-hour cycles. Through millions of years of evolution, through the relentless repetition of day and night, your unconscious mind learned to anticipate the sun. You are, quite literally, synchronized with the rotation of the Earth, and this synchronization happens entirely without conscious effort or awareness. In the 1930s, a physiologist named Kurt Richter discovered something remarkable about biological timing. He found that rats could learn to anticipate the exact time they would be fed each day, becoming active precisely before feeding time, and they could do this even without any external time cues, even in constant darkness. Their bodies had learned a pattern through repetition, had internalized the rhythm, had built expectation into their biology. The same is true for you. Your body knows, without consulting a clock, roughly what time it is. If you wake at the same time every day for weeks, you'll often wake naturally just before your alarm. Your unconscious mind is counting time, marking intervals, learning the pattern of your days. Now think about how time feels different in different contexts. When you're engaged in something absorbing, hours pass like minutes. When you're bored or in pain, minutes stretch like hours. This isn't just perception. Your unconscious mind is processing time based on the density of information and the emotional valence of experience. More novel experiences, more emotional intensity, more information processed, all of these make time feel longer in retrospect, make the memory richer. This is why childhood seems to last forever and why years as an adult feel like they accelerate. Children experience more novelty, more firsts, more pattern-breaking moments, while adults often settle into repetitive routines where days blur together. Your unconscious mind is still counting, still marking time, but when the pattern repeats without variation, the memories compress, and time seems to vanish. There's a phenomenon that reveals how deeply your unconscious mind is embedded in time. People with damage to their hippocampus not only struggle to form new memories, they also struggle to imagine the future. The same neural machinery that allows you to remember the past is required to simulate future possibilities. Your unconscious mind doesn't just record time, it projects forward, constantly running simulations, preparing for what might come next based on what has come before. Every plan, every anticipation, every worry about tomorrow is your unconscious mind using patterns from your past to construct possibilities for your future. Consider jet lag, that disorienting experience of your body insisting it's one time while the world around you says it's another. It takes roughly 1 day per time zone crossed for your circadian rhythms to fully adjust. This is because your unconscious mind doesn't update instantly, it needs repeated cycles of new light-dark patterns to recalibrate, to learn the new timing. Your internal clock changes slowly, stubbornly, requiring the evidence of multiple repetitions before accepting that the old pattern no longer applies. Change, even necessary change, even chosen change, takes time because your unconscious mind is conservative, cautious, built to trust patterns that have been repeated many times over novelty that has appeared only once or twice. There's a curious study about how your unconscious mind perceives duration. Researchers found that people consistently underestimate how long they've been doing something enjoyable and overestimate the duration of unpleasant experiences. The watched pot really does seem to take longer to boil. Your unconscious mind isn't measuring time objectively, it's measuring time emotionally, experientially. A difficult conversation that lasted 10 minutes might feel like it lasted 30, while 30 minutes with someone you love might feel like 10. Time, as you experience it, is not a neutral dimension, it's colored by feeling, stretched or compressed by your emotional state, shaped by your unconscious mind's assessment of whether this moment matters, whether you want it to last or end. Now consider something called temporal discounting, the tendency to prefer smaller rewards now over larger rewards later. Studies show that people will often choose $50 today over $100 in a year, even though waiting is objectively better. This isn't irrationality, it's your unconscious mind operating on ancient logic. For most of human history, the future was uncertain. A bird in hand truly was worth two in the bush because you might not survive to see the bush tomorrow. Your unconscious mind discounts the future because it learned, through millions of years of repetition, that the present is real and the future is merely probable. Even though your conscious mind knows intellectually that you'll likely be here in a year, your unconscious mind treats distant time as fundamentally less real than the immediate moment. There's a beautiful finding about the subjective experience of time as you age. Research shows that as you get older, your perception of how quickly time passes accelerates, but there's a twist. While the years feel like they're speeding up, individual moments, when you pay attention to them, feel just as rich and full as they always did. The acceleration comes from fewer novel experiences, from days that repeat familiar patterns. But when older adults engage in new activities, travel to new places, learn new skills, activities that force the unconscious mind to pay attention rather than operate on autopilot, time expands again. Time isn't actually speeding up, your unconscious mind is simply recording less because less is surprising, less is new. You can slow time down, in a sense, by breaking patterns, by seeking novelty, by giving your unconscious mind new things to notice and encode. As you rest here in the timeless space between waking and sleeping, your unconscious mind continues its patient work of marking moments, counting breaths, preparing for tomorrow while processing yesterday, maintaining the invisible rhythms that keep you synchronized with yourself, with the earth, with the passage of time you cannot see but always feel. There is something watching inside you, something that has been present since your first moment of consciousness. It has no voice, no form, yet it observes everything, every thought, every sensation, every emotion that passes through you. Neuroscientists have found that there's a baseline level of brain activity that persists even when you're not engaged in any particular task, a network that becomes active when your mind wanders. They call it the default mode network. This network seems to be involved in self-referential thinking, in constructing your narrative of who you are, in maintaining your sense of existing as a continuous self through time. Your unconscious mind is constantly maintaining your identity, weaving together past, present, and anticipated future into a coherent story, even when you're not consciously thinking about yourself at all. Think about the last time you were truly lost in an activity, so absorbed that you forgot yourself entirely, forgot to worry, forgot to plan, forgot even that you existed as a separate entity. This experience, which psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi called flow, is marked by a quieting of the default mode network. the part of your brain that maintains self-consciousness, that monitors and judges your performance, temporarily goes silent. And in that silence, paradoxically, you often perform at your best. Your unconscious mind can execute complex skills more gracefully when your conscious self-awareness stops interfering. The witness steps back, and what remains is pure action, pure presence. Now consider something more unsettling. Research on split-brain patients, people whose corpus callosum connecting the two hemispheres has been severed, reveals that you might contain multiple centers of awareness. When the left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere, does something, and you ask the person why they did it, the left hemisphere, which controls speech but didn't initiate the action, will confabulate a reason, will create a story to explain behavior it didn't cause. Your unconscious mind is constantly generating explanations for actions and decisions, creating the illusion that you consciously chose everything you do, even when the choice was made unconsciously and the explanation arrived afterward. The narrator in your head is writing the story in real time, smoothing over gaps, making sense of mysteries, creating coherence where there might be none. There's a meditation practice that has existed for thousands of years, one that involves simply observing your thoughts without engaging with them, watching them arise and pass like clouds across the sky. Modern neuroscience has found that experienced meditators show actual structural changes in their brains, thickening in areas associated with attention and emotional regulation, thinning in areas associated with anxiety and self-focused rumination. Through the repetition of observing their own mental processes, through repeatedly practicing awareness of awareness itself, these people have physically reshaped their brains. Your unconscious mind is always learning, always adapting, even learning how to observe itself more clearly. Consciousness can become conscious of consciousness, and in doing so, change its own structure. Consider the strange phenomenon of blind sight that we touched on earlier, but now think about what it means for consciousness itself. People with blind sight can respond accurately to visual stimuli they report not seeing. They have visual information processing without visual awareness. This suggests that consciousness is not necessary for sophisticated information processing, that your unconscious mind can perceive, analyze, and respond to complex stimuli without any subjective experience accompanying it. So what is consciousness for? Some researchers believe consciousness might be the brain's way of creating a unified narrative from countless unconscious processes, a simplified summary that allows for more flexible, deliberate decision-making. You are conscious not to process information, your unconscious mind is already doing that, but to tell yourself a story about the processing that makes sense, that creates the feeling of a unified self making coherent choices. There's a study that illuminates how tenuous conscious control really is. Researchers using brain scanning found that they could predict which choice a person would make, which button they would press, up to 7 seconds before the person reported consciously deciding. The unconscious activity that would lead to the choice was already unfolding, already determining the outcome, while the person still felt like they were freely deliberating. This doesn't mean free will is an illusion, that's a more complex philosophical question, but it reveals that the conscious experience of making a decision arrives after the unconscious processes that generate the decision have already begun. You are, in a sense, always catching up to yourself, always narrating actions that your unconscious mind initiated moments before. Now think about what happens when you practice mindfulness, when you try to observe your thoughts without judgment. At first, it feels impossible. You try to watch your thoughts, but immediately you become lost in them, identified with them, carried away by them. But with repetition, through patient practice, something shifts. You develop what psychologists call metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe your thoughts as events in consciousness rather than as truth, as reality. Your unconscious mind learns to create a small space between stimulus and response, between thought and belief, between impulse and action. This space, cultivated through countless repetitions of simply noticing, becomes the foundation for genuine choice. And here's something profound about the relationship between conscious and unconscious. While your unconscious mind can process far more information and execute far more complex operations than your conscious mind, consciousness has a unique power, the power to direct attention, to choose what the unconscious mind focuses on and learns from. You cannot directly control what your unconscious mind has learned from decades of experience, but you can control, to some degree, what new experiences you expose yourself to, what new patterns you practice, what new repetitions you engage in. Consciousness is the gardener, and the unconscious mind is the garden. You don't directly make the plants grow, but you can choose what seeds to plant, what to water, what to pull out, and over time, through patient repetition, you can reshape the entire landscape. As you drift deeper into rest, the boundary between conscious and unconscious dissolving like mist, that quiet witness remains, observing without effort, present without trying, maintaining the thread of your continuity through the darkness.